Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Agreeable Disagreements. Before we start this next episode, we just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the mass shootings in Texas on Saturday and the week before that. Obviously, that is a big topic, and it's exactly the kind of topic that Cameron and I want to be discussing on this podcast. Um, However, we decided this week that we were not going to discuss gun violence because we wanted to have a multi-episode conversation about it and really give it the time and attention that it deserves. This is not to say that this is the wrong time to talk about it. The right time is right now, and hopefully before the next shooting happens. So without further ado, thanks again for listening.
I was thinking recently, so you know this, but I don't know that everybody who may be listening, because I don't know who all is, probably everybody who's listening, who probably knows us at this point, because it's episode 2.
Well, don't sell us short.
All right, welcome, world. No, but remember, people who are listening will know that I am an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or as people might know more conventionally
Right.
as Mormons, right? And so every 6 months we have what we call a general conference where all the worldwide church leaders come together and give talks. And that also includes, the person that we hold to be the prophet, seer, and revelator, for the world. And he gave an interesting talk where he really encouraged people to not necessarily avoid debate or avoid argument, but to agreeably do so. Basically saying, like, people get into these arguments over silly things all the time, and it's okay to disagree. We need to have the discourse, but it's not okay to have these toxic and terrible commentaries that help no one, hurt a lot of people, and end up changing nobody's mind.
Right. If it's just vitriol for vitriol's sake,
Right.
it's doing no one any good.
Right. And so as you and I have been talking about this and ideating this, I've been thinking about that a lot of, this is something that I think we should see a lot more of, is people
Mhm.
understanding we don't have to yell and scream at each other and use 4-letter words to describe each other's mothers,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So I thought that was an interesting, granted, this happened in April, so it's not like this is something that happened over the weekend and I'm just like, oh, hey, it lines up. It's, something that's been
Yeah.
on my mind as we've been talking about this, but I think it's relevant. And whether you believe in my church or not, I think it's good advice that we should be trying to build each other up rather than break each other down. And I
Yeah. Yeah,
don't think that will
absolutely.
change anything politically if all we're trying to do is force feed our own opinions down other people's throats and force them to think that we are right instead of inviting them with logic and reasoning to see another side of the story, which is what essentially we're trying to
Right.
do here.
Exactly. It's less about you and I, and I think this is how our conversations have always gone, is it's been less about each one of us, really being determined to make sure that the other person knows that we're right. It's more been about an exchange of ideas and trying to see where the other person is coming from. And yes, that does include some, advocacy for our position, but
Right.
I don't think you and I have ever really been interested in, winning the debate as much as we have been just having the debate.
Right, I agree with that. I think even though, especially towards high school, I'm sure we use some colorful language with each other.
Oh, I think one of us more than the other, and it's not you.
But
I'm
I,
I am a sailor. I've been a sailor my whole life. I come by it naturally. That's
but
all I'll say.
Right, but I never also thought like, oh, he thinks disrespectfully of me. Like I always felt like,
Right.
oh, we're friends. He's using it in the same sense that a friend would. And I agree. I've always felt like it was trying to invite each other to understand rather than necessarily convince. And I would say there have been
Right.
times where you've had points where I've thought, oh, I didn't think of it like that. And it, if not changed my mind completely, definitely changed my mind towards some degree. Um,
Right.
and I think
And if
that's
nothing else,
fine.
it creates empathy for the other
Right.
person, even if you disagree. It's still it still has allowed us a way to look at what the other is saying and be like, okay, I understand how they got to this point. I don't necessarily agree, but it's
Yeah.
given me some insight into this person, so that it's not just this person's wrong, therefore they're a bad person, which I think is a lot of, where the divisiveness kind of really boils down to.
Yeah.
And and that's I, I don't know really where I was going with that, um, but no, I agree. I think that this is an important. Um, I mean, the show may not be important in the larger scheme of things, but I think these kinds of conversations are very important, and having them with people who have different views than you do is a really useful tool, not only to actually change some of the things that we agree, you know, on both sides of the aisle that we agree need to change, but also just becoming more understanding people.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something I try and do like in my classroom. I have a lot of,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, Indiana's a red state, but Indianapolis is very, very blue. Um,
Yeah.
and especially with my school's demographics, we have, I want to say like 75, 80% of our students are African American in particular.
Mhm.
And beyond that, we have the next biggest group of students are Latino, or Latin American in some way, and then after that, we've got white students. I would say this. I'm not going to sit here and count, but I could count on one hand how many students I have this year who are white, um, out of my 3 classes that I teach. And so we get a lot of students who are very much, because of what they're hearing at home, or at school, from other friends or from siblings or on TikTok, or other social media, they're automatically super pro one thing politically, anti everything else politically, and it's almost always Trump, anti-Trump, which is fine. I'm not a fan of Trump, and
I mean, I think you get that in all demographics. I think that especially at like the middle school age, and granted, I don't have as much experience, but I think a lot of kids at that time are just starting to form opinions.
right. And when we look at the social media exposure that they have, that's a lot of what
Yeah.
they're going to see. And again, I don't think there's a problem with that. I'm not trying, but what I'm trying to say here is like the demographic we serve, the students are primarily exposed to very left leaning
Mhm.
viewpoints. And so when they say stuff like, oh, Trump is terrible, Trump is bad, my first question is why? Why do you think that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, because you can
I
have
mean,
that
I can tell
opinion.
you why.
And I tell them like that is a fine opinion to have. You are entitled to that. I'm not trying to make you think anything else, but if you're going to have a stance on something, it's important to know why you have that stance.
Right.
And then once they say, well, he says this, I'll be like, okay, when did he say that? And a lot of times they'll pull up things or they'll say things that he never actually did or said. And it's,
Yeah.
I can't think of an example right now. They'll say things like, well, he hates women or something like that. I'm like, okay, well, he did say some terrible things about women. I'm not going to say that. But he also employed a lot of women. And under his presidency, he got, a lot of women entered the workforce. Now, you could say that's from him. You could say that's from a economy difference. I'm not going to say it was exactly him.
Yeah.
There's
I
a
don't
lot of
know if I
different
would
factors.
necessarily think that was his doing, other than
And I
circumstances.
point
But
that out, correlation is not causation. But I'll say just because someone says one thing doesn't mean that's also what they're doing. Um,
yeah.
and, or one thing I do remember them saying is he put kids in cages. And I said, Okay, he did continue the
Well,
practice of those. But
yeah,
who
he didn't
built the
start
cage?
that
Yeah,
practice.
and I told him that. I said, okay, who do you think built the cages? And they said Trump. I said, no, that was President Obama's administration that put those cages up and
Yeah,
started it. And they were like, what? And then like, yeah, there's always more to the story, is what I try and teach them. But
yeah. No, I get what you're saying. Is whatever their viewpoint is, you want them to have a well-founded argument
yeah,
to defend their
right.
viewpoint.
Which in a social studies class and an English class, because I teach both subjects right now, that is
Hmm.
a very important part of the critical thinking process that we try and get them to have.
Right.
You know, not only do you have an argument, but you need to have reasoning to back it up and evidence to back it up.
Yeah, I mean,
And yeah,
citing your sources is, I think, the thing that when you see people on social media who are arguing and they're making nonsensical arguments, and it becomes very divisive and unproductive. Um, I think the number one thing that I've noticed in those cases is that no one's citing their sources. And if they
right,
are, they're sources that people like you and I, who have been taught in higher education how to, find reliable sources, whether they're, peer-reviewed articles or well-respected, journalistic publications, what have you. These people are more often than not finding sources that are highly biased, not credible, and have an agenda other than just fact reporting.
right. And I think it's interesting that we're seeing some of those places that were really big when you and I were in high school and college are now starting to crumble apart. Like, for example, BuzzFeed News.
Yeah.
You know, I remember they were the big thing. Everybody went for BuzzFeed News. And I remember going from that in high school to in college, where I worked in a news media center and
Mm-hmm.
started getting training on proper news writing, started getting training on ethics and things like libel and slander, and even just social media presence and everything. And the one thing they did
Mm-hmm.
great was clickbait. They were really good at getting you to click on their stories.
Oh, absolutely. But
But
with disingenuous headlines.
exactly, exactly. And I don't know. I mean, I don't remember when the last time or the second to last time I heard about BuzzFeed was, but I know the last time I heard about it was BuzzFeed News is shutting down
Oh, yeah.
because they didn't keep up. Part of that was because they didn't keep up with new social media practices after the clickbait kind of trends changed and search engine
Well, also, I
optimization
think they've just
updated.
become a joke.
Right, right. Yeah. And on that note, talking about jokes and writing, we're going to talk very briefly about the writer's strike when we come back from this
Yes.
fake advertisement. Are you tired of people not paying attention to you at gatherings? Are you unsure of how to put yourself into the conversation without sounding awkward? Introducing Fun Facts, the newest product for socially awkward people who would like to attempt to be slightly more extroverted. Fun Facts come in a variety of packages, including science. I just read that the sun's light takes 11 minutes to reach the Earth. History.
Speaking of narcissists, Alexander the Great named more than 70 cities after himself.
And for those of you who want to have fewer conversations, we also have Why Would You Even Say That? Did you know that up to 50% of the dust in your home is human skin? Why would you even say that? Fun facts, making and breaking relationships since people started learning stuff. All right, welcome back. And let's talk about the writer's strike. You remember when this happened? When we were like 8 or whatever?
I think it was 2007 when it happened. And
Oh, okay.
there were a bunch of shows. I was trying to go through just shows I was watching then that I've since found out either just like it took a huge turn downwards or didn't even continue after.
Yeah.
And Heroes is one that I know
Heroes.
for sure uh, just really tanked because of the writer's strike. I know that Tina Fey talks about it in her memoir with 30 Rock. Um, it's the writers are the lifeblood of
Oh yeah.
the entertainment industry, and
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It was 2007, which would not make us 8, would make us 14. Um, but yeah, let's see. Oh, there's a whole link for effect on television. Um,
oh yeah, I mean it was huge.
so there's a list of like unaffected shows. Let's see, shows that switched to non-union writers. Biggest one is General Hospital and Power Rangers. Um,
Was Power Rangers still going on?
it was apparently still going on. It looks like it was a
That-
cartoon
that is
version,
news
though.
to me.
Yeah, it looks like it was a cartoon version, though. According to Jim, was interrupted or delayed by the strike. The Colbert
Right.
Report, Daily Show, all the late night talk shows.
Yeah,
Saturday Night Live, obviously.
yeah.
Big Bang Theory had a shortened season. Bones had a shortened season. Big Bang Theory's first season, actually, it looks like, was affected by it.
Oh really?
Which is interesting because that's like one of the biggest shows, and it's still. I don't think it's still going. Sorry, it
No,
recently
I
stopped.
think yeah, I think it ended. And I have no idea why I know this because I didn't watch a whole lot of it, but I did hear something on a podcast where I think it ended in 2019. But it was, I mean, it was one of the top shows on television up until that point.
So it's amazing to me that it was able to last its first season through that strike. Then
Yeah.
see House, How I Met Your Mother, Heroes, like you mentioned, Grey's Anatomy, Lost season 4.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You're just like, oh, that's why the show sucked.
Yeah, kind of.
Supernatural. Those are the big ones. Then there's a bunch of shows that were postponed. Ooh, here's shows that were canceled. Let's see if there's anything big.
Oh
there.
yeah, I mean, there was a bunch of pilots that were actually good pilots, and they just got scrapped because the studios couldn't afford to I don't know how it necessarily works, but couldn't afford to purchase the pilots without putting them into production immediately or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think the difference this time is, and again, I'm not in the industry. I have some friends who are in the industry, but I think the difference this time is that I think there's going to be a lot less reliance on non-union writers, specifically because that's kind of what this whole writer strike is about this time.
Right.
Is the studios are trying to get them to work more on the model of like a gig economy, like Uber or freelance writers, rather than allowing them to be in the union, working for them, and have the protections that a union job provides.
Right. So that would mean no or less representation. That would mean less or no benefits. Worse taxes. I mean, I do some freelance writing on the side, and it can be killer for taxes.
Yeah.
Like, I did report them, I did pay them, but to the point where it almost makes me want to not.
Right. I mean, if I could not pay taxes, I wouldn't, even though I think taxes are an important thing.
You heard it here, folks. A Democrat just said he would rather not pay taxes if he didn't have to. Wow.
Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that.
I'm going to put that on a mug or a t-shirt. I'd rather not pay taxes if I don't have to.
I would let me amend what I'm saying. I would rather have more money than I currently have.
That is fair. And you know the easiest way to get more money? Tax evasion.
It's not. No, that's not it. That is not it.
We should start an advice podcast.
We should not, if that's the kind of advice that we're doling out.
We'll call it go
Pay
to
your
prison.
taxes, everybody.
Do you think they're
Anyway,
right
what?
to strike?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone who is working a job where, especially when it comes to like intellectual property, where your intellect and your skill is the thing that's making other people money, I think they deserve to have a voice to
Mm-hmm.
advocate for themselves, which if you're not part of a union, that becomes much harder. But B also allows, or those people are allowed um, to value themselves in the way
Right.
that is fair. Now, should I mean, no one is ever going to be able to get everything that they want, but to not even be allowed to bargain, I
Yeah.
think is wrong, and I think that's really what it comes down to.
I agree, and I will admit that I have mixed feelings about unions. As a teacher, I've had times
Mm-hmm.
where I felt like the union was great, and I've had times where I felt like the union was a waste of time. I actually withdrew
Yeah.
my union membership in Hawaii um, because I was tired of them acting like they were our heroes, and they weren't. They came to us and said we worked really hard and got everybody a 1% raise this year, and I'm like, we're in Hawaii. That is nowhere near inflation. You
Yeah.
know, like no. Um, and they were acting like they were our heroes and expected grandiose applause. I had a coworker who had some other stuff happen, and the union was just not there for her. But at the same time, now I'm in a state where there's fewer unions,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of feel like the teachers here would benefit from a little bit more
Yeah.
union representation. So I feel like
A
it's one of
little
those
collective
things.
bargaining, a
Exactly,
little bit
exactly.
of muscle to back them up.
Exactly. And I feel like, and there are some districts here who have that, some don't. It just depends, varies. I'm at a charter school, so there's not, it's one of the pros
Oh,
or
okay.
cons, at my particular school. But I think this is an example of where a union is doing something right for the workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're doing what the workers want. They're helping them get what they need. And I feel like, having listened to what some of the writers talk about, this is more for the emerging writers, is my understanding. So you got some people who are
Yeah.
well into their careers. They're making a couple $100,000 an episode almost, or tens of thousands of dollars per episode.
Well, but that's the exception to the rule. The
Exactly.
majority of people that are affected by, the implications of whatever deal they had before and will be affected by the outcome of the strike are not the people that were, the prodigies that were going to be successful anyway.
Right,
you know
right.
like John Mulaney was never going to uh sorry, I'm just realizing that
Two
we're
episodes in a
two for
row.
two.
I'm going to start
Yeah.
putting that in my predictions. Mentions John Mulaney.
Well, I mean, he was a prolific writer,
He was. Yeah,
and
wrote some of the best skits and characters on Saturday Night Live.
not just Saturday Night Live, but I think a lot of sitcoms and
Yeah.
stuff. But he was going to be successful regardless.
Oh, yeah.
It's the people that are, I mean, maybe they're just starting out, maybe uh, they're just not as, I don't want to say not as talented, but maybe they're just, they're not the John Mulaney's.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they're not still funny. Maybe it's, somebody like, maybe this is a bad example, but maybe it's somebody like Donald Glover when he was on 30 Rock. He was not, a household name
Right.
at
Yeah.
that time, and thank God that Tina Fey recognized his talent and really like uplifted him. But had she not done that, we may never have seen him in Community. We may never have had Childish Gambino. I think it's that kind of talent that is really going to be harmed if the writers don't get their demands met. And that's not to say that, Donald Glover wasn't going to be successful either way, because
but he was given opportunities that he may not have had a certain bargaining agreement not been achieved.
Right. At least that's what I'm guessing, because I have no idea if that's true or not.
Well, I mean, it's the same theory that, we could have an Einstein level person living out in the middle of the countryside in China, but because they don't have access to a quality education or resources, we'll never know. It's the same kind of theory as that. And this writer's strike is helping to, or at least trying to, bring more of those people into the limelight and bring more people into this ability,
or at least get them a seat at the table.
Exactly, or a foot in the door even, which a lot of them just don't have, because I was watching, I think it's the guy who does Adam Ruins Everything, Adam Conover. He was talking about how, a lot of these people don't have money to pay rent under the current bargaining agreement. And, I feel like, that's something that needs to be fixed. And I understand not all of these people are writing top tier TV shows. Some of them are writing their first couple of shows. Some of them are constrained by the studio who says you can or can't do that, or we want to go a different direction. I get that. We can talk about this at length, but I feel like what we should talk more at length is our big topic for the week. Do you want to introduce that?
So our big topic this week is the Supreme Court ethics hearings that took place last week. As I'm sure you, Cameron, know, they were kicked off because of some shady dealings that Clarence Thomas had in regards to just gifts that were unreported. So it was my turn this week to present the issue, and instead of us rehashing what the specifics of the whole ethics hearing is dealing with, what I was hoping we could discuss is more just how do we feel about how the Supreme Court operates now? What would we like to see changed?
Right. And just a quick overview. Essentially, the issue boils down to, I had the paragraph and then I lost it. Basically, Clarence Thomas has been receiving a lot of vacations, specifically from a known GOP donor, Harlan Crow, who has in return been lobbying, not in return, but also been, doing a lot of lobbying, a lot of donations to candidates who support policies or to politicians who support policies that positively impact him. And so I guess the question here is, if we're allowed to lobby for senators and House of Representatives, is he also allowed to lobby for Supreme Court justices? And is this a form of lobbying to... And this is just, I'm thinking of this right now. This is not something I had planned. This is just a light bulb.
That's an interesting tack to take, one that I did not expect.
Because, this isn't even lobbying, though, because he's not giving him money. Because
he is.
Well, okay, he is, but it's less about...
He bought Clarence Thomas's mother a house. I would say that's financial contribution.
Totally fair, but when you look at lobbying, it's more like, I'm going to donate this amount to your campaign. I'm going to donate this amount to your funds.
Exactly.
Which is a bit more direct, whereas because Supreme Court justices don't run for re-election, because they don't have, and this touches on some of the things you were mentioning beforehand, what you wanted to touch on, like term limits, there's no real need, right? What Supreme Court justice is going to be like, donate to my campaign? So he's got to do other ways, I'm thinking. Yeah, he could just give him money, but I feel like perks are better for a Supreme Court justice.
No, because, for a couple reasons. One, and I wish I had written this quote down, and I don't know when Clarence Thomas said this, but
I will Google it while you talk.
he made some kind of comment about how he's not paid enough for this job. So he already thinks that he should be making more money. And who was it? I have it in my notes here.
He says the job is not
Crow.
worth doing what they pay. The job is not
Right.
worth doing for the grief. But, there's
Yeah.
more to it. He says, but it is worth doing. So but the preview stops. So let me scroll down and find it.
Well, but in either case, Harlan Crow is providing, or has been providing, Clarence Thomas with money, whether it's paying for vacations, paying for Clarence Thomas's mother's house. God knows what else is going on. And this is, I will say, could be correlation rather than causation, but Clarence Thomas does have a history of ruling in favor of even cases that Harlan Crow has been directly involved with. And so at that point, I would not say that it's a campaign contribution in the same way that we think of it with elected officials. I would call that straight up bribery.
And that's what I was going to hint at too. I'm on board with that. But first, let's put the context, maybe not the context, but let's add that little bit to the end of the quote, because you're right. He did say the job is not worth doing for what they pay. The job is not worth doing for the grief. And that on its own is a pretty damning quote.
Yeah.
But there's another part to it that brings it back, and it is, but it is worth doing for the principle.
But what principle? And I think that's the point of having these ethics hearings, is they're trying to discern how genuine or disingenuous that kind of statement is.
See, but I see what you're saying. I do. But as a teacher, someone who is in a career that is not worth doing for the pay and is not worth doing for the grief, but is worth doing for the principle, if someone wanted to pay for my vacation, please God, do it.
Right. But
at the same time, I'm not a Supreme Court
as
justice.
a teacher do not affect every living person in this country and abroad.
I mean, I could be teaching a future president, a future Supreme Court justice. We don't know that, man. We're going to have to wait. Let's see, they're 13, 12 right now. We're going to have to wait at least 22, 23 years to find out. And on that day, I will send you a text message that says, "Told you so, May 8th, 2023.
On that day, I will eat crow. But speaking of crow,
right, bring it back.
Harlan Crow. So the thing that really concerned me, and this actually isn't about Harlan Crow or Clarence Thomas.
Sure.
It's what Justice Roberts said.
Yes, I was surprised at his comments.
Right, about how they're pretty happy with the voluntary means in which they abide by any kind of ethics code, and they see no reason to change it. Which, if I'm getting away with something, of course I'm not gonna, be like, oh, we really need to change this.
Right.
But also to just completely disregard any criticism of the fact that that's kind of sketchy, I think speaks to the real problem with the Supreme Court, is that they're untouchable. They have lifetime appointments. If something they do is not legal, they're the ones that decide whether or not it's legal. And I think that goes back to the only hard data that I'm going to bring are two cases. One is Marbury versus Madison, which essentially gave the Supreme Court the ability to set precedences under judicial review and gave them their power.
Right.
And the second case is the impeachment of Samuel Chase, who was the only Supreme Court justice to ever be impeached, which failed. And it was a political maneuver by Thomas Jefferson to get Federalists out of the court, but it kind of set a precedent, and even the Supreme Court uses this term, an unofficial precedent, that the Supreme Court justices have essentially lifetime appointments, and they're immune from any political, not dealings, but any kind of political attacks. So really, they're untouchable.
So,
which is not the case in lower courts.
See, but I agree. And I was surprised that Chief Justice Roberts said those comments. Because, I mean, even though he was appointed by Bush, I feel like he's a significantly more moderate justice.
Yeah, I would, for the most part, agree.
Yeah, for the most part. He's still fairly conservative. He's a Bush placement, Bush nomination. But, and, you know, looking at it, I forgot that there's so many conservative nominated justices on the Supreme Court right now. It's 6-3.
Yeah.
But even with that, when you look at some of the recent rulings, a lot of the recent rulings have been 5-4. So we've got at least some bipartisanship is going. I don't know.
I don't
anyway.
know. We can get into this later. In this
that's
episode,
another time.
I have some real issues with specifically 3 of the justices.
Ooh! Can I guess?
Well, I'm sure you know.
Clarence Thomas.
No, actually,
Really?
I do have issue. I do have issue with him, but the ones that I have the main issues.
Amy Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch.
Yeah.
The
ones
Trumpers
that should never have ever been appointed in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I will say Kavanaugh surprised me. I feel like he's been significantly more moderate on the bench than I expected him to be.
I can see that. I still don't think he had any place being appointed, and I don't think that he is qualified or the type of person, like we were talking about last week, simply because he is not the type of person who should be holding any position of power.
I mean, I will say that I got tired of hearing all of those things about him, and we've had similar things said about almost not every, but maybe not even almost every. It's a very common
but we haven't had
accusation to make
congressional
against men.
testimonies with all of those people, except for in the case of Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, which
right
would make Clarence Thomas the 4th one that I think should never have been on the Supreme Court.
So I'm not going to say that none of those things happened. It's not my place to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is I'm not at those hearings. I'm not seeing the evidence. I'm not those people, so I don't know. Right? And so what I'm looking at is, what do I know about their character that I can prove for 100% I see? And some of that is going to be evidence in not Supreme Court, in Senate hearings. Some of that is going to be looking at their experience. I'm not too big a fan of those 3 either, but I also wasn't very big fan of Sotomayor, with some of her affirmative action things that she's, with her her records and some of the effects that that's had. I will tell you, I definitely liked Jackson. Really? Liked, yeah, I know. Who would have thought?
Interesting.
I thought she was very well spoken during her hearings. I think she's got a resume that is difficult to beat.
Yeah.
I feel like she's qualified. And I think especially when it comes to courts for me, I am more concerned with qualifications and the effects of rulings that you've had in the past than I am with what are your actual politics. Because I would rather someone who, on the Supreme Court at least, I would rather have someone who is more concerned with clear interpretation of the law and the ability, proven record, to do that than I would someone who policy-wise I agree with. Because I don't think the Supreme Court should be a policy-making body.
That's actually, I have that written down in my book as I should have made that a prediction.
Should have.
I mean, first of all, I will say I've been very impressed with Jackson so far. And I really do believe that the Supreme Court should not be. I mean, and even in the Samuel Chase case with his impeachment, that one of the things that scholars have written about is how that also set the precedent that the Supreme Court is immune from partisan politics.
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially since really since Gorsuch, and especially the means in which Gorsuch was nominated.
I would say I'm least familiar with him, if I'm being honest.
Well, I'm least familiar with him, but you remember how he got his nomination?
No, I don't.
That oh well, we can go into that in a second.
I'll Google it. I just sent you the text message. We got a 10-minute warning. I'll just Google it while I'm waiting for you to come back in. So just say what you're gonna say. I'll figure it out later.
Oh, okay. I was basically what I was gonna say is basically starting with Gorsuch, it's been more about policy and who's going to support the policy that Congress, the president, really wants to push through, and that's why there have been so many kind of backhanded dealings or just not by the book procedures, specifically with Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, because Gorsuch was nominated about 250 days before the end of Obama's presidency, and the Republicans said, that's too soon before an election. Meanwhile, they had no problem with Amy Coney Barrett, who had recently received her confirmation for her circuit judge appointment, and it only took her 38 days from when she was nominated to being passed through the Senate. And if you're going to break the rules, or you're going to decide that the rules are different, I think you at least have to be consistent.
So I'm going to push back on two things here. One is short, one is a little bit longer. The first one I'll say is the shorter one, which is, are these rules or are these precedents? Because
that's the hard question.
Because I don't know that these are rules, because if it were a rule, then it would be written down in a constitution somewhere. Right. I mean, in theory, I don't think there's, and I could be wrong on this, I'm not a constitutional scholar, and of the 3 different articles that declare about or talk about the different branches, I'm admittedly least familiar with the Supreme Court. But my understanding is that anybody can be nominated to the Supreme Court. Now, obviously, you can be turned down by the Senate. And so I think if they were to nominate me and be like, a social studies teacher from Indiana with no law experience, please. And they would turn me down.
I think you do better than some of them.
I mean, yeah, I don't have anyone who'd be making allegations against me. But yeah, I guess. I don't know. I think that while we have set precedents that make sense for who can and should be nominated to the Supreme Court, just because that's how we've done it in the past doesn't always mean that's how we need to do it. But I would push back more so. The bigger thing I would push back on is you're talking about justices who support policy more than justices who interpret the laws. And you're saying that mostly started with Gorsuch, and I would push back on that. I
think it stirred, or sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. You saying you think it stirred?
What? I think it started a different level of that. I think that, especially since Supreme Court justices are lifetime appointments, of course it's always going to be tied to, policy, and particularly with this dual party system that we have that is inherently divisive.
Right.
Of course, that's, politics is going to play a part in it. But the measures that we've gone through to ensure that there are lifetime appointments for people who are going to support certain parties, I think have really ramped up since Gorsuch. And I think the way that Gorsuch received his nomination instead of Merrick Garland, who I'm not sure if you agree with this or not, but Merrick Garland was the Supreme Court nominee nominated by Obama while Obama was president. He should have gotten at least a confirmation hearing.
I agree that he should have at least gotten a confirmation hearing. If the sitting president is nominating somebody, that is the dictated procedure. Yeah. And I'm fully with you on that. But if we're looking specifically, strictly at the policy side of it, I will admit that I think you're right in that it ramped up starting there, but I don't want to say that it's a huge ramp up. I'm looking at it like this, right? We've got a pendulum that's swinging between the two different parties who have power. And I would honestly say, and I don't know that it's true for Biden, but I would say it's maybe true for the movement surrounding Biden. I would say it's swinging further each side, right?
Okay.
So again, I don't think Biden is further to the left than Trump was to the right. I did that backwards in here, but I would not say that. But I feel like the Democratic Party movements have moved just as far to the left in a lot of ways as Republican movements have moved to the right. And I think that goes for policies. I think that goes for what kind of candidates they put forward. But I think it also goes for how they function. I mean, if you look at Obama, President Obama had a lot of strict policies, a lot of clear-cut policies that he wanted to uphold. And Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor were both people who were huge on a lot of those policies, especially things like affirmative action. I will say Kagan maybe less so, but Sotomayor had a very clear-cut Democrat ticket policies. And I would say that very much so. Now, I would also say the same thing about Alito. I would also say the same thing about Roberts with President Bush. And you cannot tell me that Clarence Thomas was not a George H.W. Bush nomination for policy reasons. Like a post-Reagan era.
100%.
I think it has been going... I think it's been going a long, long time. I mean, look at Sandra Day O'Connor with a Reagan nomination. I feel like it goes back a lot further than that. And I will say, I think it's getting more and more prominent. But at the same time, I want to look at people like Scalia and think, maybe it calmed down a little bit for a period there.
I would wholly disagree with Scalia. But
No. I mean, I don't mean that Scalia was a calm down. I mean, looking at Scalia to people who came after him. I would say there was a calm down period.
Scalia was such a fanatic, for lack of a better term. Then
I think that's a proper term. I mean, I would think that's a proper term.
Whether you agree with his policy or not, he was a fanatic. I guess really what I'm saying is, it's not so much what they're doing that I have a problem with. It's how they've been doing it since Gorsuch.
Okay, I can understand that. And that sounds like a great place to put our second fake advertisement. We'll be right back after this.
So last week, Cameron told you a story about us in high school, so I decided that this week it was my turn. Back when we were in 11th grade, we were part of the same AP US government class, and as part of that class we did a mock presidential election, and Cameron decided that he was going to make a fake news commentary program, kind of like The Daily Show or The Colbert Report, and basically what it turned out to be was just about 15-minute segments making fun of me and delegitimizing my presidential campaign. So this week's episode is brought to you by shameless bullying.
Picking back up on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
What do you think about lifetime appointments? And what would you do to fix the, I think, pretty blatant not tendency, but risk of corruption from having a totally unregulated branch of the government?
So I think that's two big questions there, and they're great questions. And I don't know that I have an answer for the first one about lifetime appointments, because I see the value behind a term limit for a Supreme Court justice. I do.
Mm.
But I also see the reason why we would have lifetime appointments for it, because you've got two branches of government which rotate very frequently.
Right.
And because they rotate very frequently, they are very much beholden to money, essentially. They've got to be beholden to their campaigning, which is going to include a ton of money. And I like that we don't have to worry about that for Supreme Courts.
But we do, because they're still beholden to money. It's just now all of that money is in their self-interest rather than they're maintaining a position of power.
So I will agree with that. And I don't think that it's not that we shouldn't do anything. I just don't know if saying you're a Supreme Court justice for X amount of time is the right thing. Now, that being said, I can see an argument for saying that a Supreme Court justice might be in for too long, especially if it's somebody who is old, not keeping with the times, not really sure. I mean, imagine what it would be like if that Senate hearing for TikTok had gone before the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know that it would have been much better. I feel like they would have been much better at listening than the senators were. I feel like they would have been more patient, but I still don't think that they would have grasped the concept of how it works or how it functions, with the exception of, you know, the two younger people, one of whom you like and one of whom you don't, Amy Coney Barrett and Ketanji Brown Jackson. I feel like they are the two who would probably be able to keep up with that side of the times the best.
Yeah.
So I see the reasoning behind, hey, let's switch out for somebody. But I mean, can you also imagine if someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a term limit?
I mean, I think that's a valid point, because I think that would have been a huge detriment to our country if she had a term limit.
Yeah, because who put her in? Who nominated her?
I want to say, was it Carter? I know the case that
Carter? She was in for that long. Bill Clinton. It was Clinton.
Oh, was it really Clinton? Oh,
Clinton, yeah. Mm-hmm. But still, I mean, that's less time than Clarence Thomas. Or no. Yeah. That's not by
Clarence
much.
Thomas is coming up on 30 years.
Yeah, and he was nominated by Bush Sr. So that's one president before, and he's currently the longest sitting one. But I mean, look at how people made her into such a heroine of the Supreme Court, because she was a strong liberal female who was aside from her history of being such an awesome person she is, I in no way want to diminish how amazing a person Ruth Bader Ginsburg was. I may not always agree with what she says. Right. I may not always agree with what she said or what she did, but I mean, she was still an amazing person.
You have to respect her. And in this case, respect is not a strong word as opposed to last week.
Right. But I feel like, you know, I mean, imagine if someone like her had term limits, and that term limit ran out also under Bush. We could have an almost entirely Bush Supreme Court by that point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. I think I just worry because you also, I think there are parallels within Congress, even though Congress is, elected on a regular basis. A lot of times you have people who are just the incumbent and they stay way past their prime.
That's
Look
very
at
true.
look at Dianne Feinstein. Look at Robert Byrd.
But let's look at President Biden.
Well,
I mean, he
disagree
was
there.
elected. He was first elected. I'm Googling this to make sure I get it right. He was first elected to Congress in 1972.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, I think term limits. No, yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say that I would generally be in favor of term limits across the board. I think that there is value in the Supreme Court not being beholden to such strict regulations, but not to the point where they're able to operate outside of the law and they can make a statement saying, oh, we're fine with the current system that allows us to take advantage of corruption and we're not going to change it. So,
Right.
Go whatever yourself, however you want to put that. I think I would like
go
to
love
see
yourself.
some kind of, go love yourself. That's totally what I meant.
Yeah.
I would like to see some form of oversight that is run by people who are elected, and that have more of a vested interest in representing the people that elected them.
Okay.
Maybe on a regular basis. So maybe it's not necessarily that there are term limits for Supreme Court. Maybe it's just, every 10 years they go through a rigorous review process run by almost like an impeachment hearing, run by elected officials, most likely, the Senate or House of Representatives or a combination of both. But I do think that there needs to be some kind of mechanism where we are making sure that they are in good behavior, because the amount that is written about them in the Constitution is very small.
Right.
And it's mostly, if I can just bring it up real quick.
Should be Article 4, right?
Article 3.
3, okay.
And it refers to all of the judicial branch, not just the Supreme Court.
Right.
But basically, all it says about the Supreme Court is the judicial power shall be vested in one Supreme Court. The judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. And good behavior was interpreted to mean, during the Samuel Chase impeachment, was determined to mean lifetime appointments, which I'm not sure how they got.
Yeah, that seems like a stretch.
Yeah.
I can see how they would say lifetime appointment, but again, lifetime appointment in good behavior should be the caveat there.
Right. If and we're not going into Second Amendment this episode, but it provides, I think, much less confusion than the term well-regulated militia.
I don't know that it does, because what constitutes good behavior? Can you get arrested and still be considered on good behavior?
Exactly. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But I think we can all agree that Clarence Thomas has not been acting in good behavior. Brett Kavanaugh was found to not be in good behavior pretty much across the board before he was even confirmed.
The memes of Brett Kavanaugh, however, very good behavior. Oh, you kidding me? That face he made will live forever in my dreams. Well, nightmares.
Yeah,
but still,
I can't in good conscience say he was ever in good behavior just because his.
No. He wasn't in good behavior. The memes were in good behavior. The memes
Sure,
making
the
fun.
memes-
I will always say that
I'll
a
give
meme.
credit to the memes.
I will take the Voltaire standpoint here and say that any joke about a politician is good behavior.
Okay, I get what you're saying. As long as I don't have to tacitly endorse Brett Kavanaugh in any way.
No, but you could tacitly endorse Voltaire.
Sure, I love candy.
So I think one thing that stuck out to me what you were saying that I really appreciated was that you said, I think we should have term limits across the board. Because one thing I've noticed, and this is from both sides, is that every time the other party is in power, one party says, we need term limits. We need term limits. And it's never, Republicans never say it when Republicans have Congress. Democrats never say it when Democrats have Congress. And I feel like that's been some hypocrisy I've seen from both sides. And so I really appreciated it when I said, well, what about Joe Biden? And I could see the hesitation in your eyes, like, oh, but I like Joe Biden. And then you still went forward and said it. If
Biden didn't become president, I may agree with you. But
Well,
like I said last week, he's been an effective president. I happen to like a lot of the stuff that he did. So barring that, I think,
well,
sure.
And let's be clear here. You could have term limits in the Senate and still become a president later on.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So
Absolutely.
he could have had term limits from 1972. Let's limit it to, I don't know, 6 terms. Not 6. That's 36 years for senators.
Yeah.
Let's say 3 years. 3 years. That would have taken him to 1990. Right.
Yeah.
And he still could have run for president. Still could have been a big name in politics.
He definitely wouldn't have been.
I don't know, man. I feel like, let's look at Mitt Romney. Okay, Mitt Romney, governor of Massachusetts, big name, runs for president a couple of times, gets the nomination, big name, goes out. He's out of politics for a few years. Moves to Utah, establishes residency, becomes a senator from Utah. Right? I feel like presidents, or not just presidents, but politicians in general, if they really want to, they're going to find a way to stay in that limelight. I mean, let's look at Pete Buttigieg, right? I think he's a great guy. I disagree with some of his political beliefs. I think he's genuinely a nice person. I don't think I've ever seen an interview with him where I was like, man, he's being a jerk right now. It's always been, he's being super nice. And I want to not like some of these things that he's saying, but because he's saying them in such a polite way, I kind of like them. He's just a mayor from not Fort Wayne.
From Indiana, though. Right?
Yeah, he's a mayor in Indiana. What? It's another big city up there.
He's Secretary of Transportation. Is that what he's doing?
Right. Yeah, Secretary of Transportation. He was mayor South Bend, Indiana. Right.
Okay.
And he's gonna find a way. John Kerry found a way to stay involved in politics. Al Gore found a way to stay involved in politics even after his presidential nominations. So
I wouldn't say that they were necessarily effective, though, in the same way that
some more than others.
Biden was going for the presidency.
I agree.
I think Pete Buttigieg is still very early in his political career.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
We're definitely going to see more to come of him, even after he's no longer Secretary of Transportation.
Sure.
But John Kerry, I think once he lost the nomination, and after he was done being Secretary of State, maybe he, stayed in somewhat of the limelight, but not a whole lot. I think Al Gore, same thing. Once he lost the 2000 election, was very vocal, but wasn't necessarily a politician rather than a pundit at that point.
See, and I'll agree that, let's look at John Kerry again. I'll agree he's not necessarily a pundit anymore. He's not a huge name, but he's still in an office. He is the, what does it say he is? So kind of. He, to click back really quick. He is technically, his office right now is Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, or for climate. And that's since 2021. That's a spokesperson role, but it is still a role. Now, that being said, He was Secretary of State until 2017. 2017, 5 years ago, he's 74-ish, right?
Yeah.
He's old. He's probably going to retire around that time anyway. Not everybody's going to push out that long into politics like Trump and Biden or Reagan.
Yeah.
I feel like 74 for a politician, that's a good time to start getting out of the limelight some more.
Although I will say the only reason that Clinton did not remain in that role is because she was focusing on her presidential run.
That's fair.
So if she didn't run for president, I don't think John Kerry would have been the Secretary of State.
That's completely fair. I think that is a fair assessment. But I think what I'm trying to get at here is I think there is a need for some term limits. And I was trying to say earlier is I appreciate that you were willing to apply that across the board, because I don't always see that from people in general, not just any party. I don't know how I feel about term limits for Supreme Court justices, because
right.
I do see
because
clearly
they should be immune, but they're also fallible. And I think that's what
right. Well, and they should have some level of immunity, because the last thing that you want is for the Supreme Court to become subject hugely to partisan politics.
Right.
Because if let's say that they do go into some sort of system where they have to be regularly reviewed, that's going to be 100% partisan driven. Whichever party is in charge,
orchestrate that so that it's guaranteed not to be partisan driven.
I mean, the big way that first comes to mind would be to have a committee instead of having it a full Senate, full representatives, whatever hearing, would be to have a committee with an equal amount of each political party present, or at least equal representation of each political party. But that's the only way that I'm thinking. Granted, that's the 5 seconds I had to think of it, but that's the first thing that I would think of. But we have other congressional committees that are like that. I don't know if we intentionally make them equally bipartisan, but I don't know how effective a lot of those other committees are. I have to look into that. That would be my first thing, but I still think that you're going to run into some amount of partisan politics, because, I mean, let's look at John Roberts.
Think that's unavoidable.
You're right, but I mean, let's look at Roberts. Roberts is by all means a conservative Supreme Court justice, but is he the same kind of conservative that we see from Republicans today, as opposed to from George Bush?
No, he's complete. I would say he is not even the same kind of conservative as Thomas, or certainly Kavanaugh or Coney Barrett.
Right. I would agree with that. And so my question then is, if that's the case, then what's to stop people like Trump, who, again, love him, hate him, he had a huge, I don't want to say loyalty program, because that sounds like a gas card, but he had kind of like a loyalty program where people, if you stood up to Trump's policies, you stood up to the system that he had set up, then he would get the Republican Party to kind of come after you. Yeah. And so I feel like even though he is a Republican, if he were to stand up to some of that scrutiny, I don't know that he would necessarily stand up to it. And you might end up with a more extreme movement removing a moderate on their side person in favor of someone else that they could put on that would be more in line with their policies.
I think if it was done in a way where it wasn't bipartisan, sure. Because then it's just whatever party controls Congress, then controls the Supreme Court, which is kind of a revolving door, where if you get enough people in the Supreme Court that are leaning one way politically, they're going to influence how people are funneled into Congress, and it's just going to be a vicious cycle and echo chamber, regardless of who the president is. But I think if there was truly a way, and I honestly have no idea how this would manifest itself, but I think if there was truly a way to create some kind of bipartisan uh, evaluation
Sure.
of the Supreme Court at a regular interval, to not necessarily even vote on, like, not even to have oversight of are they doing a good job, but rather are they applying, are they um, focusing on the legality of these cases?
Sure.
Or are they focusing on moral issues or political issues? And because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. They're not, like you said at the beginning, they're not supposed to be speaking on
Right.
morality of things, but the legality. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is a lot more moral arguments rather than legal arguments.
I agree with that. And I think if I were to respond to that, it would just be regurgitating what you said in a new form. And so on that note, I think this might be a good spot to end it. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think so too.
Do you want to talk about your predictions?
So I went first last time.
Okay,
I think
I'll go first this time. So I'll tell you the 3 that I 100% got, and then I'll tell you the 2 that I'm on the fence of. I think one.
I think I did bad this time.
I think I'm pretty sure one of them I'm just not going to go with, because I don't see how I could justify in any way unless I were to ask you right now, what do you think? And I don't think that's fair. Number 1, I said that you would say Clarence Thomas 5 times in one go, and you totally did. You had like one.
Absolutely.
It was like within like 60 seconds, you dropped his name at least 5 times.
I would even give that to you, like, because I do tend to stutter especially when I get worked up. And if I like had done it that way, I would be like, okay, that doesn't count. I'm certain.
No, it was very eloquent. Yeah.
Like more than 5 times in a single breath.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I also said I would.
So that's definitely yes.
I also guessed that you would think that the writers during the strike are in the right, but I felt like that was an easy one. So yeah. I may not count that because that's like an easy one.
I'm gonna side with the corporate shills that are bleeding them dry and have no talent of their own.
Yeah. I also think I got right that you said we should have term limits. Like I wrote that down, like you were going to say term limits in general. I'm not going to I thought you might mention at some point the concept of either expanding or reducing the number of Supreme Courts. And I specifically was going to say that you think we should not do either. I was going to say, my guess was that you would think 9 is a good number. Now, I'm not going to, even if you answer that or respond to that, I'm not going to give it to me because it didn't come up.
Yeah.
The other one
that is a good question, though. I wish that had come up because I really don't know how I feel about that.
Well, we can talk about that another day when we have another big Supreme Court issue. I'm sure when there comes up some other nomination in the next several months or year, who knows how long.
Yeah. This is not the last time we talk about this.
Well, yeah, and heck, if we get a dead week, we can just talk about packing the court.
Sure.
I also thought that you would speak in favor of Sotomayor and Kagan. I don't think you really did that. I specifically wrote loves Sotomayor and Kagan, and I don't think you did that, so I'm not going to give it to me.
I mean, I do have a particular fondness for Sotomayor. I don't know as much about Kagan, but yeah, I don't think I really invoked either of their names.
Yeah, you didn't really. I'm not going to give it to me. I will say, I think both of them are good people. I think both of them are nice people. I think I would lean more towards agreeing with Kagan on some things than Sotomayor.
Yeah.
I think Sotomayor is very, very well spoken. I think she's very eloquent. I like listening to her talk and present arguments. I don't know that I agree with her on a lot of stuff, but anyway, that's a different story. All right, so I got 3.
I would expect nothing less of you. So my first one, I don't know. I'll let you decide.
Okay.
How we deal with this one. I said either you would agree that either Gorsuch's appointment was quote unquote fraudulent, or that Amy Coney Barrett's was fraudulent based on the way that they were, because the whole thing was like a president in their last term shouldn't be able to appoint a justice, and then come the next time that happened, when it favored the Republicans, they were like, oh no, we didn't mean it that first time.
Right.
So I was predicting that you would either you would defend one or the other to the detriment of whoever was the other one.
I will agree that you need consistency between the two, and I do think it's unfair to say no to one and yes to another just because it favors you. But I don't know that I spoke out to that.
You didn't, yeah. So I will not give myself that point. But I think either way I was wrong, because you essentially agreed with what I said, even if I think both of them were fraudulently appointed.
Right.
All right. So second one is, I thought you would talk about Roe versus Wade.
Oh. You know,
I don't think you brought it up at all.
No, I can see why you would think I would talk about that, given that we're talking about Supreme Court. But I guess the reason I didn't even think to bring it up was because we're talking more about the role of the court and not necessarily specific cases.
Right. Well, I was thinking more like you would have used it as a talking point to support some other idea, not necessarily that you would be talking about Roe versus Wade itself.
I got you.
The third one I think I got, but
Okay.
I will let you determine that. I said that you would think that Kavanaugh should not have been appointed.
I'll give it to you. I don't think I expressly said that, but you are right.
The subtext,
and I did kind of hint towards it. Yeah, I'll give it to you. I think that's fair. Yeah.
I'm gonna lose this one anyway. So, my next one was that you would side with lifetime appointments, which I think
I would lean more towards that. Yeah, I think I still am on the fence, but I lean definitely more towards that. I think that was pretty clear. That's a fair one. Yeah, you're good with that.
And then my last one is that, and I don't think that A, you didn't bring this up, and B, I don't think that you agree with this. But I said that Cameron will agree that Clarence Thomas should resign.
Ooh. Oh, I don't know that I could give you an answer right now. That might have to be a sleep on it kind of thing. Interesting.
Really, because I was expecting in either direction, either a hard yes or a no. I wasn't expecting you to kind of have to consider it.
Yeah, I have to consider that, because part of me wants to say yes and part of me wants to say no. Part of me is like, he's too old, get him out. And part of me is like, but lifetime appointment means lifetime appointment. And he can do what he wants. What?
He's being straight up bribed.
Right, but my thing though is, if Justice Roberts makes the comment that he makes, who else is getting stuff? And what are they getting?
Oh, 100%. I don't think it's exclusive to Clarence Thomas.
Right. And so my thing would be, instead of saying immediately resign, my next step would be, what is everybody else getting? And then what should we do from there? Because if it's purely just Clarence Thomas, yeah, I think maybe we should resign. He should resign for what he's done. But if he's just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot going on that we need to be aware of, then
and the other justices are getting similar kickbacks and gifts, and
then I think that
you want to call it,
we would need a lot more to consider.
Interesting.
So,
I am of the opinion that they should all go if they're in any way corrupt or beholden to anything other than the American legal system.
My only issue with that is that then you've got one president who can replace all of the justices.
Sure. I think, thank God that didn't happen during the last presidency. But my point is that if you're going to hold yourself to um, this stature of we are above the law,
Sure.
you have to act like it, and
I agree.
you have to have respect for that, and you have to mind your P's and Q's and make sure that you don't take advantage of that position that you hold. And I think what we've seen, even if it is just the tip of the iceberg, is that that is not always the case. And I think that's troubling.
And you know what? I think we can talk more about this next week, because the topic that I would like to talk about next week is very similar.
Okay.
And I'll give you a little preview. Senate or Congress insider trading.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not surprising at all. I hesitated to look into much of that in preparation for today's conversation, because I do think it's very closely linked.
I agree. And so it might be good we can continue a little bit of this conversation next week too.
Yeah. No, I like that. But in either case, I think that I think it was 3-2.
3-2. Yeah.
So, all right.
I win one.
You won. Last week we tied.
Yep. So it's 2-1. Let's do we each get a point if it's a tie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That
All
looks
right.
better on the resume.
Well, on that note, thank you for listening to Agreeable Disagreements. I've been Cameron. This has been Andrew. Do you have anything to remind our audience about, Andrew, before we head out?
Yeah, just that you can find us on, it should, I think by now, be all of the podcast streaming apps.
Or close to it.
Audible, Apple Podcasts. I also wanted to give a special thanks to Halcyon Club for providing us our theme music. It's the song This Life is Tough But Fair off of their EP Headset Emotions. We forgot to thank them last week, but we wanted to make sure that we just give them a shout out because they're a fantastic band.
100%. Thank you very much.
So, and with that, do you want to give the sign off or should I?
No, I did it last week. You do it.
All right. Remember, it's pronounced Worcestershire.
You sure it's Worcestershire?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Does anyone know?
I'm just going to cut it right there. Does anyone know? That's going to be the end of it.